And I think the more that we accept and come to love the way that our body is managing to, hopefully keep us alive, the more of a realistic and positive attitude we can have towards making wonderful clothing that makes us feel really great, fits us well and suits us, and is just as unique as we are. Hello and welcome to the Crimson Stitchery, a video channel about making all things beautiful and useful. My name is Anushka. You can find me elsewhere online as the Crimson Stitchery on Instagram, and we have a Ravelry group. And this video is coming to you courtesy of all of my wonderful and amazing sponsors who are the contributors to this channel over on Ko-fi and Patreon. So thank you so much to all of my Patreon supporters. You can find my creator page at patreon.com/thecrimsonstitchery if you want to check out the whole host of features and benefits that you can enjoy in return for supporting my channel with monthly membership subscriptions. So it's currently mid-May, which is the middle of Me Made May, which is an annual month-long challenge that I think started with the online sewing community, centered around wearing the handmade clothing that we've made for ourselves. And I've kind of attempted to participate in Me Made May a couple of times over the years, but I'm just personally not very good at doing these kind of daily or monthly challenges. But as you know, if you are a regular watcher of my videos and if you follow my content over on social media, I've been making and wearing my own clothes from about the age of 14. I'm now much older than that. And so I've got quite a lot of experience and advice when it comes to the matter of making clothing that you're going to wear every day, that will fit you well, that you'll enjoy wearing, and primarily also when it comes to making alterations in fit or style of patterns and pattern blocks that you may be working with. This video channel essentially explores all of my creative practice, so basically whatever I've been up to. Knitting, sewing clothing and mending things, but recently I've mostly been knitting. What people often comment on when it comes to my finished projects is that even when I knit other people's patterns, I rarely follow the pattern because I'm always making changes to improve the fit and also get the exact style lines that I want for myself. And I understand from many lovely viewers that you guys have found this to be quite an inspiring thing to show online. And I thought that I would make this video to share my attitude that will hopefully support you further when it comes to making alterations. Now, I started thinking about this a little while back because about a month or so ago I posted a very quick and not particularly well worded question on the YouTube community tab here, where I talked about the fact that I was trying to develop my own personal standard sizing charts for knitting garment patterns that I had been developing and writing over the spring. And I explained that I had a very convoluted relationship with sizing charts, I think is the best way to describe it. And I wanted to know what your pet peeves were when it comes to knitted garment fit when you're following other people's patterns, because I kind of knew what my issues were, but I wanted to open it up to you guys, my audience. I always love hearing from you. But as I said, I wrote this kind of quickly and I didn't put that much thought into it. It's not like it was a carefully planned focus group or anything like that. And I ended up finding the responses pretty interesting actually, because it felt like it was this snapshot survey of just the kind of general attitudes that are out there for people that knit and sew their own clothing and people who come from a range of different experiences. So in that post, I mentioned that my personal background and professional background is as a costume maker, coming from performance costume rather than fashion, and that is something that really truly informs my worldview, through the depths when it comes to embracing making clothing that honors your body, the body that you have and where you are at now and how you use your body. So I thought that I would start by giving a little bit more background information on how my professional training has informed my attitude to size, fit, and making alterations to clothing. And then I'll go to these 4 key takeaways that I want to share with you that will hopefully inform your practice going forward. I truly hope that you find this supportive, encouraging, and useful. So just before we get started, I'll talk about what I'm wearing. I'm wearing a hand-knitted vest made out of a bamboo cotton yarn from old Rowan Kim Hargraves pattern, and I'm wearing a pair of linen trousers that I adapted from a vintage 1970s pyjama pattern, and I made loads of changes to that, including adding this jaunty little pocket. So it is a me-made outfit for me today, although I've got to say I don't love that phrase. I'm sharing this with you today, because I think that these garments fit me pretty well, but they're certainly not perfect. When it comes to my own journey with sewing and knitting, I've realised recently that it's become extremely cyclical. Because as I said, I learned to sew and knit at school. I had a really excellent textiles teacher that was absolutely amazing, and I learned to sew clothes for myself. And part of the reason for that was because I always loved historical, vintage styles of clothing, but there was absolutely no way that I could afford to buy real vintage. Certainly when I was a teenager in the 2000s and thinking about this now, 2010s, that definitely wasn't the case. I could not afford to spend anything from £80 to £200 on a 1950s vintage dress. So I learned to sew them myself using reproduction vintage patterns and real vintage patterns that I found in charity shops and car boot sales. I was then so captivated by this kind of world and this craft that I decided that I wanted it to become my profession, and I studied performance design at art school. So I trained as a costume and set designer and costume maker. I kind of split my time through the degree, although I did end up doing my final project in my third year for my thesis on tailoring and drag queens. Then for many years and throughout all of my studies, I worked professionally in industry through a whole range of jobs, including making costumes, from scratch myself, working amongst costume teams, dressing, designing costumes, supervising costume budgets and stuff like that. Honestly, you name it, I did it, because that's the nature of freelance work. Then when I was in my mid-20s, I decided to go back to university and pursue the academic side of my profession, and I studied fashion history, and I'm now doing a PhD where I study clothing and culture. And since I've stepped away from the professional world of making things for a living and supporting things that are made bespoke for live performance, either plays, musicals, gigs, festivals, always live performance, I stepped away from that as my profession and then found myself actually with the headspace to start to enjoy making clothes for myself again and engaging with this wonderful community that has just bubbled and blossomed online through sharing my experience, my projects. And I've always been so interested to find out how people come to these crafts, knitting and sewing and making your own clothes, and kind of realising that for some people it can be something that you do on a sort of amateur level, if you like, throughout your whole life. So you might have years of experience, but then you haven't had that professional side of things where they are different. So it's been very, very interesting to me communicating with you guys, just from people who are from different backgrounds and experience levels, and in many ways realising how much that I had taken for granted, and actually just how much more there is to learn in general constantly, which is something that I love. I love to learn. And so I wanted to share that with you because underpinning everything is the fact that I've always made clothing on a bespoke, one-to-one kind of level. Even if I was making things, in batches, for a costume, say if it was for a chorus line or something like that, it was still being fitted to each individual body, even if the overall conceit was that everything looked the same, actually it wasn't on the inside. So the reason that I keep emphasising my background in costume and performance costume specifically is because it just differs so much from fashion sewing. And I think that home dressmaking, knitting and sewing, kind of can sit in this sort of hybrid space between the two, but I think that there are a lot of conventions that have come out of mass-produced fashion and ready-to-wear clothing that we put onto our homemade clothes that I don't recall ever really feeling when it came to the costume work that I was doing. So as a designer and maker of performance costume, everything was always done on a completely bespoke level. We'd start by, meeting the performer, taking a full set of body measurements where there could be, you know, 30 measurements or even more across the body, every single body part, and would take photographs of the body as well, so we could understand, you know, how it was in 3D form when we didn't have the actual person in front of us. Then we might take a basic mannequin and pad it out in order to fit the measurements of the body of the performer, and also just to actually be the body shape. And we did this for absolutely everything, right? So I think that's firstly one thing to note, is that we never fitted costumes on just a basic mannequin that, you know, had just come from a warehouse. We always adapted the mannequin to look like the body of the person the costume was being made for. When you start making a pattern, you start off by creating the blocks, which are the basic shapes for the garment that are, you know, pretty similar, and then you start to adapt those basic blocks for the unique shapes and style lines of each costume. And to do pattern drafting, to create the first basic block, you follow a template or a formula. Just, you know, sketch this out for the bust or the chest, the waist, you know, the length and all of that. You just kind of knock it all in roughly. But you would never, ever, ever expect the basic template that you drafted to immediately fit the performer. Ideally, if you had enough time, you would cut out a toile or a mock-up out of calico or any kind of inexpensive fabric that had similar properties to the final fabric, right? So stretchy if it was stretchy, fluid and drapey if that was the case, or firm and stiff if that was the case. And you'd make a toile and you'd make adjustments. So you can see that right from the get-go, you're approaching the creation of the garment with the expectation that it's going to be unique to the person that has to wear it, firstly, and secondly, that you're going to make adaptations and changes. You are never, ever, ever expecting that what has come out of the mold, either the basic pattern or the basic mannequin or anything like that, you're never expecting that that is going to fit the person. And that doesn't matter whether the person is really small, standard size, plus size, really tall, really short. It just doesn't matter. You know, even if they had so-called model dimensions, you would expect to make changes. And this is the key attitude that I feel has been lost somewhat along the way when it comes to the current, you know, contemporary home dressmaking. Because I think that thanks to the idea of ready to wear, you know, loose fitting garments or garments that are stretchy, you know, knitted fabrics and whatnot, there's this idea that we can just, you know, cut things out, sew, put them on us, and that they should fit well out of the tin. Or the same with knitted garments, that we can just pick one size based on one or two key measurements, but not the full list of 30 odd, and that it's just going to somehow work out for our body. And I think that it's really, really important to move away from that attitude and embrace the uniqueness of each individual body, which is what I'll be going on to talk about more. So the key difference is really that when it comes to ready-to-wear fashion, it's been created to be sold en masse. So whilst they're not going to please everyone, they're hoping to please, you know, most people and the average. And also the fact that every store is going to have its own set of blocks, you know, the basic shapes and the basic measurements, and that will change, you know, across different garments perhaps, and also across maybe different lines in the store. You know, maybe you've got one for teenagers, one for more mature women. So that basically equates to the fact that the actual size on the label, you know, clothing size, doesn't really mean anything, right? Because it's all down to the actual physical measurements of the garment. And I think in many ways we have kind of got to a point where we're approaching sewing and knitting for ourselves in the same way as approaching, you know, buying a t-shirt from the high street. And then it seems like many people are being very disappointed when things aren't quite right or don't quite fit right. And also part of me wonders if we are more critical about fit, about the garments that we have made for ourselves, by ourselves, and perhaps less critical of the fit of garments when it comes from a store. Now obviously this is gonna be individual to you guys, but it's really about the development of that critical eye, which I'm gonna go to in a moment. The other thing to note is that as I was cutting clothing for performers often have very unique body types to their profession, based around their profession. I think that we can think of performers in the same way that we think of athletes. because singers are going to have very developed, chest muscles, the intercostal muscles, the diaphragm will be very developed, back muscles to support the fact that, the cavity of the chest is the instrument. And so there might be a lot of broadness there. Dancers will inevitably be incredibly muscular, and often, in different maybe types of the body, depending on exactly what type of dance it is, and so on and so forth. The ability, especially for people that worked in musical theatre, to sing, dance and act in restrictive costumes for 8 shows a week, 6 days a week, is really quite something, and the body is going to have particular musculature. So as such, even if you might, start with someone who had very average looking measurements on paper, actually the distribution of the, the fat, the muscle, the posture and the carriage might be quite different to a person who, works at a desk all day, for example, or just has, different job. So I hope that provides more insight about what it's like when you create any kind of bespoke piece of clothing, whether it is a costume for performance or just a bespoke tailored item in general, maybe not for performance. So my first key point of advice is to embrace the uniqueness of your body. Just start there by acknowledging that your body is doing such an amazing job of keeping you alive, constantly multitasking and doing 10 million things at once. As such, the flesh on your body is shaped by your experiences on an hourly, daily, monthly and yearly basis. It's going to change. It also changes based on your physical health and your emotional health. I am fully aware that I am speaking as an able-bodied young woman, but what I want to stress is just the uniqueness of everybody's situation. Yes, there might be some people who fall more towards an average body type, not that that really exists. And there might be people who have to make a lot more adaptations due to their circumstances. But actually, across the board, we are always going to be making adaptations because we are all unique. And even within families, things are shaped through life experiences. Our physical health and our emotional health both affect our body, our weight, our posture, just how we feel about things in general. And I think the more that we accept and come to love the way that our body is managing to, hopefully keep us alive, the more of a realistic and positive attitude we can have towards making wonderful clothing that makes us feel really great, fits us well and suits us and is just as unique as we are. My second piece of advice is to always be developing an observant and non-judgmental eye. I think that there's always opportunity to improve our kind of critical and visual perception skills. And I think the first step is always in noticing that there's an area that can be changed or improved, and then obviously the second stage is to go away and research what exactly it is that you have to do to make those changes. And that sort of thing I'm not covering in this video. Like many others who have had the same kind of professional background training that I have a very matter-of-fact attitude when it comes to fit on the body. And that's because I was trained to just walk into a fitting room and immediately assess all of the areas in which a garment didn't quite work on a body or where it needed improvement or changes, and then just immediately start smoothing fabric, pinning, folding, making a comparison between, maybe a costume drawing and looking at what it looked like in real life and thinking about the proportions. I just learned to make a lot of snap judgments in that sense, and I've definitely still got that skill. Now, of course, it's completely different when you're doing this in a professional situation because you're fitting an item of clothing onto somebody else's body. So you can step back, you have that physical distance and also mental distance. It's genuinely so much harder to do fitting on yourself, not only physically, because just actually, manipulating all of the actions on your own in front of a mirror is more difficult and can be slightly less accurate, but just mentally, because wishful thinking is a real thing. Our mental perceptions can have such a huge effect on how we view and then treat our physical body. So the more that you can develop that non-judgmental eye and just try and see what it is that's going on in the garment, on your body, just see it for what it is and not what you wish it is or hope it is, or, you know, kind of try and convince yourself that it's like this or it's like that, the better you're going to be at achieving that fit and hopefully ending up with a fantastic outcome that is comfortable to wear. So my next takeaway is that we should accept alterations as a norm. You are not a Barbie doll or an action man. You're not a plastic figure that's unchanging. You are a living, breathing body that is subject to change at all moments, on an hourly basis according to mood and fluctuations, you know, just in terms of digestion and what you're eating, on a weekly and monthly basis, and of course on a yearly basis as we age. Everything that we're experiencing in life is happening to us as a living, breathing body. We're taking on those experiences physically and mentally, and they're impacting us. As such, our bodies are going to change, and that is normal. All that we can do when we're making clothing for ourselves to enjoy is to make the clothing that can fit us in the now, in the present, and just do our best. It's never going to be perfect, inevitably. I think aiming for perfection, you know, whilst it's important to have high standards and to push yourself to improve, expecting everything to be perfect is just unrealistic, because things take time, and actually mistakes can really be embraced because they are always a learning opportunity. Technically in terms of the skills, but also mentally when it comes to the relationship that we have to making to our own bodies and our life in general. But honestly, I think that there are so many, you know, teaching moments of humility when it comes to making our own clothes, and really just, you know, seeing and accepting bodies for what they are, and also viewing that as a position of strength and experience. I'm turning 30 this year, and I'm starting to see the effects of my life being lived on my skin in terms of wrinkles, and I'm just trying to smile with it, you know, not be afraid to smile because they add smile lines. I think that it's just the life that I've lived and the life that we all live that just impacts the way that we are in the moment, and we should all just be creating clothing that is going to serve us and allow us to live our fullest lives as best as we can. So do definitely develop a practical attitude towards alterations. You can certainly develop systems for yourself that will help you make alterations, such as, for example, when you learn to sew, when you learn dressmaking and pattern cutting, a typical step is to create a set of basic blocks to your measurements. So that's drafting out the basic patterns, cutting and sewing toiles and then altering them, and then you can take those basic blocks and basic toiles and compare them to ready-made patterns and use that to help you check for the shape. There's absolutely no reason that you couldn't do that in knitting as well. It might be that you have a really well-fitting sweater, whether that's homemade or shop bought. You could put that on, observe the ways that it works on your body, the ways that it could do with improvements, and take measurements and notes and then compare that to the patterns that you are knitting. You can just take regular notes and reassessments of clothing and the reason that it fits you well, in terms of the fabric, the way it falls on your body, the fitting, you know, the actual shaping in the garment blocks, also the use of ease, negative ease and positive ease, how that works in different places on your body. And you should definitely be taking regular measurements, I would say at least on a yearly basis as a minimum, and ideally again with a friend or someone kind that can help you. If you're lucky, at a class where you can have someone with a trained eye to assist you, but definitely be taking measurements and just see them for what they are, which is a set of numbers that are a tool to help you create clothing for the body that you have, rather than anything judgmental or anything value driven. They are not, they're just one representation of you on a piece of paper. Definitely not the whole picture. I am completely aware that I'm speaking as an able-bodied person, and I just want to express some empathy towards anybody who's watching this video facing a difficult or ambivalent relationship towards their body. I don't want to gloss over that fact, but I think in my message of accepting and embracing the body that we have, it's really just about living in the moment, living in the now, and making things that we are going to be able to enjoy and that can lift us on a daily basis, as opposed to creating something which isn't going to fit or isn't going to flatter in a certain way and is going to bring negative feelings surrounding the body. I also just want to add that it's really important not to be judgmental of others, and hence why I've got this very, very kind of no-nonsense attitude to the body. You know, we have our bodies that we should just try and love as much as possible, because hopefully they are keeping us alive in the moment. But just try not to make assumptions about other people based on their size or shape or, you know, any kind of perceptions of health or anything like that, because you just don't really know what's going on in people's lives, especially health-wise. You don't know what their situation is, what they may have changed, what they may be in the process of trying to do. And also just the fact that everybody inevitably carries around quite a lot of baggage when it comes to body image. Even the people that seem the strongest, because we're just constantly bombarded with messages of what we should look like in order to be an ideal type of person, whether that's a woman, a man, someone that identifies as gender non-binary, in terms of age, in terms of ethnicity. There's just so many messages that are ultimately telling us that we are not quite right if we're not fitting into the mold. And even if we do have that ideal body type in one way or another, just still that pressure, I think, and that feeling that we're not quite enough somehow. And we're getting that messaging constantly from all of the media that's surrounding us in the world, in culture, from advertisements, TV and film, social media, any kind of branding. You know, the messages that we should be that we need to be something else, we need to be someone else, and that's generally utilised to try and sell us one kind of product or another. And personally, whilst I've always considered myself quite a strong person, I've noticed even in myself that these assumptions and these messages just work themselves through into my head and just come out at the most inopportune moments and take me by surprise. And then I suddenly realise, wow, like I'm actually I am carrying all of this stuff as well. And not even to mention just all of the stuff that people have with home and family when it comes to body shape and size. There's being too big, there's being too small, there's being too this and too that. I just think, forget all of that. We should enjoy and embrace who we are, and when that comes to making clothing, it should be as unique as we are, not expecting patterns to fit or work for us as they are out of the tin, because that's only taken for the average ideal imaginary body type and not for us in all of our complexity and difference. So on that note, my last key takeaway is that there is no such thing as a standard sized person. So forget about standard body sizes, forget about any kind of standards at all, and just take things as they are, take things as they come. Just keep reminding yourself of that, so that when you create something and it doesn't fit right in one way or the other, you know, it's not about blaming ourselves for being too tall, too short, too thin or whatever. And it's also not about necessarily blaming the person that wrote the pattern. I'm not saying that errors don't exist, that people definitely make mistakes and there are some things that are just plain wrong. But I think if we approach creating things from patterns, creating things from our body, just as an invitation and a starting point every single time, then we are going to be open to the changes that we need to make and actually open to the best results that we can possibly find for ourselves. So that's everything. I hope that you have enjoyed this video. Let me know where you are, if anywhere, on your journey to creating your own handmade clothes, whether that's sewn, knitted, crochet or anything else, or even if you only knit socks and nothing else. I'd love to hear, and I'd love to hear what approaches you have taken to making alterations to clothing and how that's been getting on for you. I love the fact that people are always so generous to respond in the comments, and it really allows other people to come and give and get advice as well here at the Crimson Stitchery. So if you've enjoyed this video, please do give me a thumbs up down below and hit subscribe if you haven't done so already for more videos. I normally record a vlog at the end of every month where I share everything that I have been working on that month. And a last massive thank you to everybody who has supported me over on Patreon, making recording videos for the Crimson Stitchery possible. Thank you so much for your support. If you enjoy what I do, you'd like a bit more and you want to get involved, do head over to patreon.com/The Crimson Stitchery to pick the right tier with the benefits that you'd like to enjoy. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you at the Crimson Stitchery again sometime soon. Bye!